Okay, welcome everybody to the Ortelius January 19th architecture meeting. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll kind of dive into this. So one of the things I have been working on is just kind of pulling together our architectural design. So I'm working on a markdown that has everything in it. So to kind of go through where we are today, our current architecture, and then in the new architecture, what we need to do on that front. So I'm just gonna, since everybody pretty much knows what the old architecture looks like, we'll go ahead and just kind of dive into what I'm thinking on the new architecture side. Looking at the functionality that we're trying to achieve, one of the things it would be to go ahead and replace the monolithic Java, JSP servlet front end with something a little more modern. So Joseph sent me the link to the Savati dev, and I found RedHat GS, which is what Docker Hub is built on. Joseph, did you have a chance to look at RedHat? Joseph, you there? We can't hear Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just me or is everybody?
Yeah, I can't hear him either.
Okay. If somebody can drop in chat, just let them know we can't hear him. But while he's trying to get some audio working, some of the other pieces, I just can't get rid of Zoom here. It's being annoying today. So some of the other pieces that we'll be working with are we'll need new microservices, and actually some of the existing ones will have to change slightly, but mostly it'll be new microservices that we'll need to use to replace the transactions that we have in the monolith. There's not a lot of overlap, so it'll be more. The more important part will be like the data that we have to kind of deal with. And my thought process right now, and I didn't really put this down, is instead of trying to run the front end and the back end, the old UI and the new UI against the same database, that we'll just actually have a migration path to move from the old database to the new database and a new UI. Kind of gives us a clean cut at that point, and I think it'll be easier for us to have a nice new UI and a new framework along with new microservices to deal with. So right now, looking at Fast API or Node for the microservices, it just is really dependent upon what the service is going to do and which language seems the most appropriate to do that in. The goal being, keeping a true microservice where it's a small code base at that level. The idea behind the microservices are going to be that they'll actually be an abstraction layer to the database, and we'll get into the database here shortly. And then we'll probably need a separate microservice to serve up the front end framework and the static content. The two that I have listed up here, it looks like their basic framework implementation is you have like a data access router. So if you have a page that needs data, that page talks to the router and the router talks to the back end, which makes it pretty easy from a design perspective to have everything kind of in one place at that level. We'll have to see when we dive into those two frameworks. And these are not the only two frameworks. If somebody has a favorite framework, like for React or Vue, we'll take a look at that. I did go through based on our discussions that we've been having in the proof of concept pieces around the database. We're currently working with the XRPL, which is going to be the NFT storage IPFS. One of the things that we'll need to do is built in a searchable cache, because there's really no way to be able to search NFTs. You basically get this hash. They're based on location and not on name. So you get this SID that says this is where this data lives, but you know nothing about the data that's there. So with a combination between the ledger and NFTs, I believe we can build a searchable cache. And kind of the idea that I have is all the data that's going to be in IPFS will be normalized, which means, like, for I keep on coming back to the license object. So if you have a SBOM that says this package, click for Python is an Apache 2, and then we have another package for like Fast API is another package that may be Apache 2. We're only going to store the Apache 2 license once in IPFS, and both of those SBOMs are going to point to that. So that's what I mean by a normalized database. So we remove duplication as much as possible. One of the things, and what that allows us to do is to minimize the amount of data that we're storing, because when you look at the SBOMs and all the data that we're collecting, there is a lot of repetitiveness in it. So when you look at the deltas actually are pretty small. So from a storage perspective, we should be pretty good. But in order for all this stuff to be searchable, we'll need to create an index of that data. And I'm thinking using the Orango database to do that. It seems the most flexible. I did look at the other one that Tony suggested, and they want more of a full on schema to be able to do what we need to do. And I think that's just going to be too restrictive at that level. And the idea is when you go and the front end needs some data, it'll go and search through the cache. The cache will then give us the location. Let's say we're looking for the details about an application. That will go ahead and give us the SID to the application. And then we have to go through and denormalize it. So denormalizing is pulling all the pieces together back into one big document. And then that document we would actually store in the Rango DB. So if we need to get to that application again, then we're going to go ahead and use the one that's cached at that level. So that's kind of the concept behind it. And this concept will also be able to be applied to the OCI registry as well. So the Rango DB is really, like, you can think of it as an ephemeral database, which we go through and recreate everything from the ledger and the IPFS to create the cache, the searchable cache. And then from there, we kind of bring things up as we need it. This is one of the things when you look at when people use Ortelius UI, they're looking at a small subset of all the data that's out there. So we don't need to have everything right there available all the time. You can kind of think of it as like a fast disk versus slow disk type of access. And the caching will help us move things between the slow and the fast area. Now, we've been meeting with RedHat around the OCI registry specs that they're going to introduce. They don't have any documentation on it yet on what they're new extensions or plugins are going to be. But what I'm thinking is that the OCI registry would be treated similarly as the NFT storage, where we would go ahead and make the searchable cache, telling us where in the registry we need to find things. And I believe the registry may have some transactional history, kind of like the ledger. We'll have to see on that front. I'm not 100% sure what capabilities the OCI is going to have to give us a transactional history of how things evolve over time for an object. I'm pretty sure it's there. We may have to do some extra work to build that out. But the same idea is we'll be doing the searchable cache and then the ephemeral database for the documents at that level. Both of these, when we go through and do all this stuff, we're going to actually be creating, we may need to create 2 sets of microservices or 2 sets of libraries. One to be able to interact with the IPFS, another one to interact with the OCI. But when the idea is when we pull something off of the storage, that it gets transformed into whether it's coming from OCI or NFT IPFS, that it gets transformed into the same object, and then that same object gets pushed back over to the front end. So the front end is going to not know the difference whether it came from, and it doesn't really care. Just that we need to make that process pretty seamless. One of the things that we may need to do is to keep an interim Postgres database around, and that's basically for things like user IDs, access control, domain names. Not 100% sure on this. This is going to be one of those that kind of plays out as we go. I did list out some of our APIs that we're going to need, and I think this is going to be simplified just based on some of the like prototyping I've been doing. Like these two, where we have a service for doing a create, update, or delete, then another service for just for the read. I think we'll be able to combine these. The ArangoDB and some of the layouts in Python aren't too big, so it doesn't look like we're getting a huge, massive microservice. So we should be able to combine these two, which will simplify the number of services that we have to run. Because you can see it's basically duplicated everywhere for the CVE deployment. So the number of microservices will basically go in half here. One of the things I did introduce was tagging, a component tag and an application tag. I have not heard anything. I don't know if he's on the call today. If Nick is here from Ukraine, no, it doesn't look like it. But we may need tagging in order to do some of the additional searching and UI layout. So I added that in there. Basically, if you think of like Docker Hub or even like npm.org, you can tag things and say this is a login method, or this is going to be a compression function. That's the type of tagging I'm thinking that we may be able to use to help find things in the database. Ignore this down here because I'm going to go over to another document if I can find it. Let me go pull it up. Drag this over here. Oh, come on. Oh, did I get it? Got one of them. There we are. So I did do basically like a class layout of the objects. So for example, we'll go down to something that's a little more interesting. Components here. So some of the things that when we lay out a component, this is mostly, this data structure is coming from the Postgres database for the most part. I did take the opportunity to reorganize some things slightly to just make it a little more efficient. And these classes and objects are going to be what the UI front end is going to consume. So one of the things that we need to do is we had like these lists. They'll have a list of components, things like that. And those lists are pretty basic. What's the name of the component version and the domain that it lives in? That's like pretty much all that we need in the list. So this is like the example here where we have the hello world as the name and the domain that it lives in. There's other things that we have to provide, like the parent and parent, the parent of the component version, things like that. So this will be pretty close for the list, and same thing like with the application version. Basically, it's like the name and the domain. From there, if we actually look at an individual component, so when you go into in the UI, you click on a from the list view, you click on an actual component version to dive into the details. We actually inherit from the previous one, so all that the name and stuff like that comes from there. Other things that we need to have are like the owner, the creator, the type, packages, basically the SBOM data. What's the list of all the SBOMs that are consumed by this component version? This is of type package, so it's a list of packages. And then we have a list of vulnerabilities. We have a README, the list of applications that are consuming this. And then what does this component version provide for RESTful API endpoints and what it's consuming. And then we have our attributes. Our attributes are all the key value pairs that we have. One of the things on the audit log I was looking at, I think this is going to probably change. We have to play it out because this will be coming from the XRPL ledger, for example, the audit trail. So it may or may not be associated to this. I have to look at that. So when you look at the JSON after it's all expanded out, you have your name, your owner information, the packages that you're dependent upon, the vulnerabilities, your README, your attributes, all your attributes and stuff like that. And this is one of the reasons why I chose Arango over some of the other graph databases, because like this part here around the attributes, it can be free form. So if we want to add in like the committer's username, we can add that into this list without having to go redefine the schema. So as people go through and add in their own attributes, we can actually just, on the fly, not have to worry about changing database schema and just go ahead and consume them at that level. And then you'll see we have application version. So I have pretty much all of the objects out here that we need in examples. So if we actually go over to and if you look at, let me jump over here real quick. I've stubbed out a little Python program. So we have our get. So this will retrieve a list of all the component versions. Then we have get the specific component version and the version details. And then we have like a post, which is the create, the delete, and an update. The nice thing is when we do like these updates and things, this all just is the object that's coming across from the front end in JSON format. And then when we go to save it to the database, we'll transform that object into the normalized version, break it out into all the little pieces and shove it into IPFS or OCI in the right locations, and then add it to the Rango database in like its full format at that level. So if we look at the Swagger for this, If we do our get here, we can see that we're going to get the key value, which is going to be, basically a number, a unique number for that. And one of the things I was realizing last night was the key actually could be the SID on IPFS at that level. So the key is basically a string, and we may be able to use the IPFS SID for the key, which will help some of the searching and things and simplify some stuff. Little bit up in the air still. So when we look at the get, we can actually see the example coming back of all the data that's going to be passed back to the front end at that level. So I'm going to go ahead and build out the stubs for the other RESTful APIs. Like I said, it doesn't look that bad. We got maybe a half dozen, a dozen that we need to do. So the one we're just looking at is this combination, and I'll stub it out for all the other main stuff. Because we already have all the objects pretty much defined, it's just literally going through, and all you do is you say what you're importing and returning. So it should be pretty easy to get these stubs out there so we can actually start looking at the data. Some of the coding that we'll need to do is actually go through and things like the normalization, denormalization of the JSON, the write through cache, those type of things we'll need to kind of manage on that front. So that's where the coding will be. I think once we get one or two of these done, that'll be pretty easy for us to go ahead and kind of mass produce them across the board from that perspective. So that's kind of what I've been working on, and giving us, I will create a PR for the architecture here once I get a little bit further along. Hopefully next week, early next week, I'll have the PR out there for us to actually approve and make sure and comment on and things like that, to make sure we have everything covered at this point. So that's it for the presentation, and if anybody has any questions, let me know. A lot to cover.
What was your front end again? Right.js.
There's two front ends. Let me drop them in the chat. One is,
And is it just static files?
it's interesting. I'm gonna drop it on Discord real quick, just so we have them. Come on, there we go. Put them in dev. So we have, for some reason, oh, there we go.
While Steve is searching, I think me and Sasha look similar these days.
Yeah, you do.
I just love Pakistan.
But I just say like we look similar these days.
Yep.
I
Streamlined.
think we need to be say like this.
So I dropped into the into Discord on the dev channel the two front ends. Joseph brought the one. The second one, the Riot one, that is what Docker Hub uses. That one's kind of interesting because it's component based. I don't know if you ever looked at a Google project called Material. The idea behind Google Material is to create these components, these web components, so you can think of it as widgets that you get to reuse and stick on the UI. They went through a lot of research on the component widgets. So, if you want to draw a box with curved corners, they have spec on what the radius of the curved corner is supposed to be. I mean, they went crazy. you know, how much space should be in between each line in between each widget on the screen. So that one is yeah, they went crazy over it. If you look at the material, I think maybe material.io, I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, you shared that with us once before. I went to go look at it.
Yeah.
It looked really cool.
And the other one is I don't know as much about. Joseph was the one I found recommended that one. So we have to take a look at that as well. I don't think it's component based, but it does look like an easy framework to utilize. So we just have to make a decision here in the next week or so which one we're going to go with on that front for the front end part.
Is it static assets that are the front end of that?
It has I believe both of them have like the concept of a router that you put all of your backend calls in. So all your AJAX calls to make the database RESTful API calls is in this router, and each front end page talks to the router, and then the router talks to the backend.
Sounds kind of like Angular.
Yeah, it is. They're very Angular React type of frameworks.
And do you want that containerized, the front end?
Yeah, it'll need to be in its own container. And that's where we could possibly even containerize it a little further down the road, where we could containerize, like especially with the Riot one, we can containerize those individual component widgets. So if we want to go out and replace or update a component, we can do it that way, because it's kind of more like on the fly. I don't think it's compiled.
And why do you want to use a container for that? I'm going to ask a really crazy question now.
Okay.
I'm glad, because I know that you'll give me a great answer. Since they're all static files, can't they just run out of a bucket with some smart cloud formation or a type of CDN in front of it? And
Yeah,
you can save cost.
Yeah, they definitely could. And that's where we have to look at where the material pieces come in. The only reason that the flip side of that, put it that way, is if we're controlling the location of where that static content is coming from. Let's say you want to change a color of one of the widgets, and that widget's been containerized. You can have two different versions running at the same time, and you can actually use Istio to pick which one you want to go to. So the dev side could be picking up the new version of the container with the new color of the component, where the production one is still using the old container. And as you go through and do your testing, you can actually then basically do a Istio switch on the virtual routing to say, okay, now this is the new container I want you to use for production. That's one of the really fancy down the road types of options.
Yeah, and you won't get that with a bucket. Yes.
No, with a bucket side, you actually have to change the source code to point to which bucket you want to look at.
Yeah, that's a hack.
So yeah, it's one of those things that we have to look at from a. Now, how much are those widgets going to change, and how much are we going to be dealing with that stuff? It's probably low. So like your suggestion of dealing with using a CDN will probably be the easier way to go.
Yeah, I was just asking because it's obviously cheaper to run it like that, right? Than running it in a Kubernetes cluster, which is much more expensive.
Yeah.
And it's just static files. But yeah, I see your point. Yeah.
Yes.
So I have one question not related to the document, this topic, but Tracy is here. So Tracy, I need to start the podcast, and I want some backstage guy to be appearing on the Ortelius podcast. Do you know anyone from the backstage?
Well, I know the folks from Rody.
So do you have email or something? How do we able to connect?
I can connect you to Martina from Rhodey. And she
She's
might
like
be-
the CEO of Rhodey.
She's a CTO
Oh,
of Rhodey.
CTO.
She's a CTO of Rhodey. So
yeah,
I'll
definitely,
connect-
definitely.
Yeah, I'll connect you to her.
So you connect us via email.
Yes.
Yes,
And I'll
please
let
do
her
that
know-
today.
Yeah, I will. And I'll let her know that we'd like to kind of do a podcast on it.
Yeah, so I think there is a one open source offering and one enterprise offering. So one is Backstage and one is Rhodey, I guess.
Yes. So Rhodey isn't the primary. They've done a lot of work on Backstage, but they are they do a lot of the support and the enterprise versions. I'll
And
send
and
it-
they Rhodey's like the SaaS version of Backstage.
Yes, SaaS version. Absolutely.
So
So-
they're really nice. We've talked to them a couple times.
So that's really important. I want to start with the Backstage this time because there's a lot of noise coming in the Backstage. So I want to have some content on that. So please circulate some emails. So we are up to 19th of January and haven't doing any podcast. So I'm waiting for some guest.
Okay, I'll send it out today.
So, okay. So I just to drop off with another call, but thank you very much. So we'll meet again. Sasha, we stay similar.
Yeah. Any other questions?
No, that's all good, Steve. Thanks.
Oh,
I just need my repo.
All right, I'll get it out there.
Thanks.
I'll do that right after this.
Yeah.
What do you want me to name it?
Yeah. Whatever you are.
Should I just call it Terraform?
Well, it's Ortelius and it's to get developer. It's a developer environment. So what's
Okay.
Ortelius dev environment? I don't know what is a good. I called it Ortelius in a box, but it doesn't have to be called that because that doesn't really make sense to anybody. Of course, you're a developer. What makes sense to you if you were joining an open source project? And wanted
I'll
to
do
set up-
something with the word dev in it. I'll figure it out.
Okay, cool.
I did just to give you an update, I did submit to GitHub our application, the contract for the GitHub sponsorship so we can get paid through GitHub for working on issues. I haven't heard back from them yet. I'm going to see if I can get some help from the Linux Foundation on that front. It's kind of a black box when you talk to GitHub as a small company.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
So hopefully the Linux Foundation, since they initially started the conversation, they may be able to help us.
Mm.
So I'm working on it.
Yeah, it's a hard one.
Yeah, it's a pain. This is a very complicated process for something so simple.
It's way too complicated. Agreed.
And then I'm gonna also the XRPL folks. We had a meeting with them the other day, and they kind of like a group meeting. And one of the things they asked us if there's anything they can help us with, and I think once we get some stuff a little bit further along, I'm going to circle back around with them to make sure, see if there's anything they can provide from their side to make life easier for doing this type of handling of the money for open source projects.
Yeah, sounds like they need to improve that part, right?
Yeah, there's things that you would think that they would say, oh, you're an open source project, we're going to give you a grant. We've already set up a relationship with GitHub. Here's you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's in the works.
Hope you win on that one. I don't know.
Anybody else have
Thanks.
anything?
No.
So Steve, I already picked up a few of the issues from XRPL. So I saw you have created a couple of issues. So if there is something that we need to cover up on the urgent basis, right? Just let me know and start working on that.
Will do. I think that from a coding perspective, the biggest part that's going to be probably the most difficult is going to be the transformation from back and forth between normalized and denormalized. I think that is going to be either some Node.js or some Python libraries to be able to do those transformations. I think that's going to be where the most of our work is going to be at. And things like once we get the full denormalized document and shoving that back to the front end and creating the front end should be pretty easy if we do the back end work correctly. That's what I'm hoping. You never know, but that's the goal. So I will once I get this architecture document out there, I'll start going in assigning issues to folks so people know what they can start working on, or throw out a list for people to pick and choose of what's on the short-term list that we need to code. That's kind of the plan. And Tracy.
I'm sorry, can I talk now?
Yep, you're going.
There was a person I spoke to on the XRP breakout that said he had built a search for NFTs and IPFS, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys want to look at that open source repository to see if there's something?
Yeah, I saw that you sent the link around. I just had to go and dive in and research it.
Well, is there anybody on the call who would, I'll put it in. I will put it in. I don't know where his repository is. I'm sure we can find it though. It's called XRP Win.
Win.
WIN. Yeah. Here's this, what he calls his playground. I'll put into Discord.
Yeah, we'll have to take a look at, we'll have to research that. I don't.
Did you find it? Or maybe it's XRP Win.
I found
I think it's XRP Win.
Yeah, I found the playground. And looks like what he's doing is you give it a SID, basically an NFT, and then it'll go through and visualize it. So I don't think it has the search capability that we're looking for.
Okay.
But it may come into may help us with the when we get into the ledger and kind of like given a ledger transaction, being able to visualize it or pull things apart. We'll have to take a look at it. Because it does look like it's pulling some history.
He says he does.
Yeah.
Because this is a tools analyzer, so he wants to be able to go analyze history.
Yeah. Because what it's showing is like for this individual trend, I can't tell if it's a trade. Yeah, it is a trade on. So it is a it's looking at the ledger, and then from the ledger it's looking at all the history for that ledger.
Oh,
I just can't figure out why. He sent me a bunch of stuff and I can't find it.
What was that, Utkarsh?
Yeah, you're correct. So the transactions that are there on the for the trading, right? It's visualizing those.
Yeah. Because some of the transactions you can see where this basically XRP coin is being traded and all the transactions along with it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that is why the application name itself is mutation parser. Like whatever changes happen over the time, this application is parsing this.
Got it.
Here's the GitHub repository.
Oh, cool. Looks like he has a couple of them out there.
Well, he said he'd be happy to chat with us about what he's doing. All of his stuff is open source. If there's any way his stuff could help us.
Yeah, we can, looks like it's written in PHP. Interesting. Funny. That's my dog dreaming.
I just thought it was like something on your computer.
No, that's the puppy having a crazy dream here. All right, cool. Yeah, I think right now, I don't think we need to, because we haven't gotten that far into the ledger side. I think once we get a little bit closer on the recording things onto the ledger, that we may need his help.
So just to level set where we're at with that too, we sort of have a March, like at the latest April 1st deadline on what we were going to complete for them and show them. So we should just keep that in mind.
Yeah, well, it may not be 100% complete, but we should be further enough along to be able to show them something.
Okay.
I think the backend should be ready.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. At least for some of the transactions, I think, you know, we may not have every single object being pushed back and forth, but kind of starting at the lowest level, which would be component inversions, are kind of like the lowest level objects that we have. Because then, you know, application versions consume those. So that's why I've been focusing mostly on component versions. But looking at the samples for like the Arango piece, it looks like just a couple lines of code to be able to add something to the database and fetch it. So it doesn't look that complicated.
Yeah, but do we know like how much data that is there for your application? Because like I haven't seen there is any concept of lazy fetching there.
I think most of it will be, well, there'll be two types of data that we basically retrieve. Is one's a list, and the list is basically, like I said, just like name and domain are in the list, and then we have the detail. So it's really like two types of transactions that we have. Oh, and then the other one is gonna be the graphing, you know, dependency to dependency graphing, those type of things is more of a, you know, what do they call them? The edges and nodes. I can't remember if they call them nodes or edges in Arango. But those relationships are something that we would be another type of query. And data wise, I think because we're going to be using Arango as just an ephemeral database that will kind of populate on the fly from IPFS and the ledger, that we should be able to minimize the amount of data that we are going to store. I don't think we're going to have to worry about in the Arango database dealing with like terabytes of data. I think it'll be relatively low in the gigabytes.
Nice.
At least that's the idea that I'm hoping for. Anything else?
for me. Just the repo, just so I can put out the box, the Ortelius in a box.
All right, we'll get that out
And then
there.
I put my README in there, and then I write Tracy's blog.
Great.
Cool.
I got most of that done yesterday. I'll send everybody's kind of assignments.
Oh,
I know
and I have to,
Tracy's got my back.
I do.
Yeah.
I just have to push your website updates out.
Yes, please.
All right, cool. I'll
Okay.
Sasha, I will send you a message on Discord.
Thanks, Steve. Am I to do
Thank you
PRs,
all.
or was it just an initial commit?
I'll give you full access to it so you can just do whatever and not have to worry about
Okay.
PRs.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Because it's just a headache trying to set up a repo and you got to do PRs.
It's true.
It just takes too long. Tracy just goes in and creates a PR and then approves it herself.
I like that. Well done, Tracy.
Thank
A lot of control, a lot of oversight there.
you.
Yeah,
Well, mine's just for the blog, so the website, so.
All right,
that's the way
everybody.
it should be.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.